I would like to share an intriguing chess strategy that involves surprising your opponent. Typically, opponents expect you to focus on achieving checkmate, but this strategy involves targeting their queen instead. By adopting this approach, you can gain a significant material advantage, which can ultimately lead to a victory later in the game. But wait, there's more. I've got an intriguing chess puzzle waiting for all of you. Be sure to stick around until the end to enjoy the complete experience. Let's begin with this trap that often works against more advanced opponents, but may not be as effective against beginners. In this trap, after white plays pawn to d4, you respond with knight to f6. After white plays pawn to c4, you sacrifice the pawn with pawn to b5. White captures the pawn, and you advance your knight to e4. Usually, white plays knight to f3, which is the most common move. Here, you play pawn to b6, pretending that you want to fianchetto your bishop to b7. If your opponent is more advanced, they may notice the critical flaw in pawn b6 and play queen to d5, launching a double attack. This move is what you want them to play, but beginners may not notice it. In response to queen to d5, you play bishop to b7, sacrificing the bishop. After white captures the bishop, you play knight to c6, intending to trap the queen later. There aren't many squares for the queen to go, and queen to a6 is usually the only available square. If white plays almost any move, you play knight to c5, trapping white's queen completely. White has to be concerned about their position and tries to escape by playing queen to a6. You play bishop to b4 check, gaining tempo, and putting one more piece around white's king, limiting the squares where the queen can retreat. After bishop to d2, you play your winning move, knight to c5. The queen is attacked, and the only square for the queen to go to is b5. Now, you can win the queen by playing pawn to a6, but it's even stronger to trade the bishops first. Otherwise, your opponent can get two minor pieces for the queen. You trade on d2 first, then play pawn to a6, ultimately winning the queen. Moving on to another trap, we'll focus on an opening known as the Scandinavian defense e4 d5. After knight to c3, black plays queen to a5. Instead of playing pawn to d4, which leads to a lot of theory, we play knight to f3. This move is a little provocative and aims to exploit a common mistake made by many opponents. When your opponent plays bishop to g4, a move that seems uncomfortable for you, you play pawn to h3. Surprisingly, this move makes bishop g4 incorrect and gives you an advantage. If the bishop retreats, you can pressure it with pawn to g4, potentially placing your bishop on g2, advancing your attack while gaining extra tempo. Black finds themselves at a disadvantage. If your opponent decides to trade on d3, you respond by capturing with the queen, simultaneously targeting the b7 pawn. Black's plan to develop the knight to c6 and potentially castle and play knight to d4 is not allowed. Instead, you play bishop to e5, pinning the knight and threatening to capture it, as you attack it twice. Black's only way to defend the knight is with the slightly awkward move queen to b6. But now comes the winning shot, knight to d5, attacking the queen. If the queen captures the bishop, you respond with knight takes c7, forking the king and queen, achieving your goal of winning material. Keep in mind that these traps require careful play and are more effective against opponents who are not familiar with them. Let's imagine you're playing a game of chess as black. Your opponent starts with the move pawn to d4, hoping for a queen's gambit. Instead of playing pawn to e6, which is expected, you surprise your opponent by playing pawn to e5, counterattacking. White will usually respond with pawn to d5, creating some problems for white, as they can't develop their knight normally. In order to develop their bishop, they have to move the pawn, so they often play pawn to e3, hoping to trade off the pawn. However, you play bishop to b4, confusing your opponent once again. When white covers with bishop to d2, expecting a bishop trade, you play pawn takes e3, setting up a trap. Your opponent notices that they can win a bishop for nothing and captures on f2. However, king takes f2 is not an option for white, as it would lose the protection of the queen, allowing you to win it. Instead, white plays king to e2, hoping to maintain the guard of the queen. Here, you have a rare opportunity to underpromote in a practical game by promoting to a knight, delivering a check to the king. White captures the knight, but then you play bishop to g4, adding another attack to all of white's vulnerable pieces. Ultimately, you win the queen on the next move. If your opponent starts with the move pawn to e4, they are doomed to lose no matter what they try. You have already analyzed 903 variations and found ways to win the queen against this move. Another common move is pawn to f4, known as the king's gambit. You play pawn to d5, sacrificing a pawn to gain the initiative and set up an attack. After pawn takes d5, you continue sacrificing pawns with pawn to c6, confusing your opponent once again. At this point, it becomes difficult for white to figure out what to do. The king is a bit exposed, and they have to worry about potential checks with h4. The most popular move for white is pawn to g3, and you play pawn to e4 to attack the knight. The knight jumps forward to d5, justifying the pawn on f4, as it now defends the knight. You play bishop to c5, annoying white and showing that they won't be able to castle easily. White plays bishop to b5, creating a pin against your knight. It seems like they can take the knight twice, but you calmly ignore it and play knight to f6. If white takes the knight on c6, hoping for a double attack, you play bishop to d7. After white wins the rook, they are happy, but you surprise them by saying, "Wait a second, you won a rook, but I'm going to win a queen." You play bishop to g4, trapping white's queen on its original square. This is a rare case, and you not only win a queen, but also continue your attack against white's exposed king. You are completely winning in this position, and you can even consider moves like queen to d4 or queen to g2 to further your advantage. If your opponent opts for the Scandinavian defense, one of black's main choices, you can transition into the Smith-Morra gambit. After playing pawn to c3 and sacrificing the pawn with pawn captures knight on c3, you gain a development advantage and long-term initiative. Typically, black responds symmetrically with knight to c6 after knight to f3. At this point, black realizes the potential threat of your move pawn to d4, attacking their knight, and often prefers to play pawn to d6 to prevent your pawn from advancing and then safely develop their knight to f6 without worrying about potential attacks. However, you disrupt their plans by playing bishop to c4, which prompts black to play knight to f6. Despite black's response, you proceed with pawn to d4, putting black in a difficult position. This trap is often unfamiliar to opponents, leading them to make mistakes and fall into your dangerous attack. For example, if black captures your knight on c3 with their knight, you happily recapture with pawn takes c3, but you don't trade queens because your goal is to win black's queen. Instead, you capture on d8 first, employing a tactical motif seen in previous traps. After black's king captures on d8, you secure a winning position by capturing the queen. You can enter this trap against the Scandinavian defense if you start with pawn to e4, and after black responds with pawn to d5, you play knight to c3. Alternatively, you can force your opponent into this variation regardless of their initial move. In either case, you begin with knight to c3, an uncommon move that is perfectly acceptable as you develop a piece. Black's most popular response is pawn to d5, aiming to control the center and potentially create threats. You then play pawn to e4, feigning an exchange offer. After Black captures your pawn, instead of immediately recapturing, you play bishop to c4. Your opponent might think they can now defend the pawn with knight to f6, but you continue with pawn to d3, again appearing to offer a trade that you never intended to accept. When Black captures on d3, you continue playing in a Gambit style with knight to f3, developing another piece. Since your opponent is accustomed to your apparent material losses with each move, they might gladly capture one more pawn on c2. However, instead of capturing back with queen takes c2 or queen takes d8, you already know the trick. It's time to sacrifice your bishop with bishop takes f7, surprising your opponent, who thought their pawn was attacking. By ignoring the threat and sacrificing your bishop, you follow the same motif of capturing the queen with queen takes d8, securing a winning position. Now, it's time for a puzzle. In the given position, it's White's turn, and you need to find the best move for White. Share your answers in the comments, and let's see how many of you can solve it correctly. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe to stay updated with future videos. Take a moment to check out the other videos appearing on your screen right now. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Take care and peace.